In the cold silence of Sector 9, a place claimed by no empire and feared by most travelers, the Zalvari Deep Space Sensor Array picked up something unusual, an object, massive and drifting slowly across the neutral zone. At first glance, it looked ancient, a leftover from some forgotten war. Its dark hull was scarred, its profile jagged and menacing like a broken blade. The Zalvari, a collective species of logic and technology, were curious. Ships like these didn't just appear. In uncharted space, a probe was sent, silent, unseen, to scan the vessel. Initial readings showed nothing exceptional. No signs of life, no active communication, just a shell of steel and shadow. But as the scan went deeper, things began to change. Power spikes erupted across the ship's core, pulsing like a heart, buried beneath armor. Energy levels that exceeded even Zalvari dreadnoughts began to emerge. Layered reactors, backup cores, and redundant systems stacked one on top of another, like the vessel had been built not for battle, but for apocalypse. The HSS Valiant, as the faded human lettering read, was no ghost. It was a sleeping giant. The Zalvari scientists watching the probe feed were split. One, with a flicker of arrogance, laughed and called it human overcompensation. After all, Earth's species had once been observed to be chaotic, emotional, and excessively aggressive in their early transmissions. Perhaps this was simply a relic of their past bravado. But another researcher, older and quieter, noticed something off in the weapons grid. There weren't just a few turrets. There were hundreds. Missile bays stacked behind plasma casters, kinetic launchers buried under layers of automated cannons. The design didn't make sense to the logical mind. It was as if the ship was forged to fight not one enemy, but an endless swarm of them, and to keep fighting even after its crew was gone. A chill spread through the observation chamber. This was not a vessel designed for war. It was designed for survival at all costs. And then, as the probe attempted to run a final diagnostic, a low-frequency pulse fired directly from the Valiant. It was subtle, almost elegant, but powerful enough to short out the probe's primary sensors. For a moment, all data streams went dark. The room went silent. The Zalvari had made a mistake. The ship wasn't drifting aimlessly. It was waiting. And now, it knew they were watching. The Zalvari Council convened in haste. The ancient vessel, floating silently in space, had rattled their confidence, sparking a flurry of urgent activity. In the dimly lit council hall, tension hung heavy in the air as the leaders and scientists gathered around a massive holographic display, projecting every scrap of data collected on the HSS Valiant. It was clear that this was no ordinary warship. The initial scans had already proven it to be far beyond their expectations, but now the deeper analysis was underway, and what they uncovered sent ripples of unease through the room. The ship's hull, far from the rigid metal the Zalvari had expected, was something far stranger. The alloy was self-healing, an intricate mesh of materials that should not have been possible. Some of these alloys had only existed in theoretical research on their homeworld. The ship's outer layer could absorb impacts, repair itself, and even regenerate its structure over time. This wasn't just a relic. It was a machine designed to endure, designed to survive. The engineers and scientists continued their work, tearing apart the Valiant's blueprints piece by piece. What they found next was even more disturbing. Its engines weren't merely powered by traditional energy sources. They were fueled by something far more volatile, something akin to a controlled singularity. A small, contained black hole, perhaps, or some variation of it, a power source so unstable and dangerous it should not have been possible. Yet there it was, contained in the heart of the ship, providing more energy than the Zalvari had ever thought feasible for a single vessel. The magnitude of this discovery brought a collective gasp from the council. A singularity. A weapon of mass destruction, potentially, or a life source beyond comprehension. And then came the weapons. The weapons. The Valiant's arsenal was an overwhelming sight. The ship's turrets and weapon systems didn't just cover the ship. They were designed to create destruction on an unimaginable scale. Plasma cannons, energy displacers, and kinetic impact launchers covered every inch of its surface. But it was the array of planetary disruptors that made the entire council pause. These devices, long since banned by the Zalvari for their catastrophic potential, were capable of tearing apart an entire planet's surface in moments, distorting the very core of its existence. Such technology had been deemed too dangerous even by the most battle-hardened civilizations across the galaxy. The very thought of it resurfacing made the Zalvari uneasy. Who were these humans? What were they? As the room filled with murmurs and speculations, one commander's mind drifted to the past. He remembered ancient texts from old records, fragments of history long since buried. Earth, the place where this ship had originated from, had been marked quarantined by the Galactic Council many millennia ago. It was not because of their lack of intelligence or progress, but because of their aggression, their unpredictability. Humans had been observed to lash out violently at anyone who encroached upon their territory. They had been written off as a threat. The idea that these humans had now crafted such a terrifying warship left a chill in the room. Was the galaxy truly ready for a species that wielded such power? Suddenly, the Council's tech division pulled up an old archive from their forgotten records. The data, encrypted and locked away for centuries, flickered to life. The words that appeared on the screen sent an icy shiver down every spine in the room. Earth's war doctrine. Peace through superior firepower. It was simple, direct, and chilling in its meaning. Earth had always relied on overwhelming force to maintain order, to dominate, to survive. Peace had never come through diplomacy, only through the ability to destroy any who threatened them. The council fell into a stunned silence. What kind of people were these humans? And what would happen when they realized the Zalvari were not so invincible after all? The gravity of the situation pressed down on everyone in the room. There was no turning back now. If the Valiant was any indication, Earth's future, perhaps the future of the entire galaxy, had just entered a new, terrifying chapter. The only question that remained was, would humanity be a force for destruction, or a species seeking something more? The Council was no closer to understanding, but they knew one thing for sure. The Valiant had made them afraid, and that fear was something no one in the galaxy had anticipated. As the Zalvari struggled to comprehend the full scope of the HSS, Valiant, their best minds turned to one final option: understanding the people who had created such a vessel. If they could grasp the motivations and history of humanity, perhaps they could predict what the Valiant would do next. The alien data network hummed to life, and soon the collective of Zalvari historians, engineers, and diplomats began sifting through the fragmented transmissions humanity had sent into space, beacons of a species eager to share both their triumphs and their failures. What they found in the archives was not what they had expected. Humanity's history was far from one of peaceful coexistence. Instead, it was a history written in blood and fire, filled with wars and struggles for survival. The early years were marked by relentless conflict, entire civilizations brought to the brink of destruction in global wars that spanned continents. Through it all, humans had never given up. It wasn't just that they fought, they survived. War wasn't just a means to an end for them, it was woven into the very fabric of their existence. The Zalvari watched in stunned silence as footage from Earth's past played out before them. Cities burning, armies clashing. And yet, through it all, humans found a way to rebuild. They didn't give in. They didn't back down. They adapted. And then came the discovery of something that sent a wave of shock through the entire council: the Scorched Earth Protocol. This wasn't just a tactical doctrine, it was a cold, unflinching commitment. The protocol stated that if humans Faced an enemy so overwhelming that their survival was in question, they would not surrender. No, they would scorch the earth. They would burn everything, sacrifice everything, because if humanity were to fall, they would ensure that no one could rise from their ashes. The idea of total annihilation as a form of defiance, as a last stand, was something completely foreign to the Zalvari, a species that had long ago given up on such extremes. The very concept of not giving up, even when there was nothing left to lose, was beyond their understanding. The Valiant was not just a weapon of war, it was a symbol, a living monument to that unwavering belief. Every deck plate, every inch of its massive hull was infused with the memory of humanity's darkest moments, a testament to their refusal to surrender, no matter the cost. The ship was a legacy, not just of power, but of unrelenting will. The Zalvari were split. Some of them argued that they should act now, strike the human ship before it could become a threat. These voices, filled with fear, pushed for a preemptive strike. If the Valiant was anything like the humans' history, it would only bring destruction. Yet others, more cautious, argued against acting rashly. They had seen enough of human history to know that these people were not easily intimidated. There was a complexity to their drive, a determination that couldn't be crushed by brute force alone. The decision was not clear, and the council hall became a battleground of opinions, each faction pushing for a different course of action. Tensions ran high as the conversation spiraled into debate. The question hung in the air. Was humanity truly a threat, or had the Zalvari misunderstood them? Just as the debate reached its peak, a sudden transmission blinked across the screens. The message was brief, too brief for comfort. The words, chilling in their simplicity, flickered into view. Observed? Logged? We see you too. A deep silence settled over the council room. Every Zalvari in the chamber froze, their thoughts racing. The Valiant had noticed them. And worse, it knew they were watching. The coldness of the message hung in the air, thick with the weight of what it implied. The ship wasn't passive. It wasn't a relic. It was alive. And now humanity was aware of the Zalvari presence. The council had been watched, studied, analyzed, just as they had done to the humans. The question now wasn't what the humans would do next, but what would happen when they decided to make their move. The moment the Valiant began moving, a cold wave of panic swept through the Zalvari command. The ship had been passive, drifting like a forgotten relic of a lost age, but now it was alive, its engines powering up as it charted a course directly toward the nearest Zalvari colony. There was no sign of weapons activation, but the path the Valiant was taking made it clear that this wasn't a simple change in course. It was calculated. It was deliberate. It was an act of aggression, or at the very least, a show of strength. The Zalvari command scrambled. All available fleets were mobilized, and a stealth squadron was dispatched to intercept the human warship before it could reach the colony. If the Valiant was as dangerous as they feared, they needed to stop it before it could reach a populated system. But as the fleet moved into position, reports began to trickle in. One by one, the stealth ships failed to respond. Silence descended across their communication channels. It was as if they had been swallowed by the void. The last transmission, received from the fleet, was a single message, chilling in its simplicity. They let us leave. The room fell into a heavy silence. The implications were terrifying. The Valiant hadn't engaged the fleet. It had allowed them to retreat. The Zalvari had no idea how to process this. The humans, whoever they were, had an understanding of power that defied everything the Zalvari knew. The fleet had been intercepted, not by force but by choice, and they had been allowed to escape. The humans didn't need to destroy them. They had simply let them go, a reminder of how powerless they were. As the gravity of the situation settled in, cracks began to form within the Zalvari ranks. Psychological breakdowns began to surface. Some of the command officers began questioning everything they had ever known. The human philosophy, embedded in the AI systems of the Valiant, was simple but unsettling. Survival is mandatory. Peace is optional. The very idea that humans had adopted such a philosophy made many of the Zalvari uneasy. Survival above all else, even at the cost of everything else. For a species that had long since embraced cooperation and coexistence, the human perspective was a brutal contrast. The thought that a species could embrace a philosophy of pure survival with no concern for peace made the Zalvari shudder. Were the humans a race that could be reasoned with? Or were they a ticking time bomb, waiting to explode when least expected? In the midst of the growing panic, one voice rose above the rest. A diplomat, known for his calm and logical demeanor, proposed an audacious plan. He suggested that the only way to deal with the Valiant was through direct contact. It was risky, yes, but it was also the only way to understand the humans fully. Perhaps, he reasoned, they could learn more about their intentions, and perhaps even reach some form of understanding. Some in the room agreed, though many others felt it was too dangerous. Direct contact with a species so unpredictable, so seemingly indifferent to peace, could end in disaster. Still, the diplomat argued that it was their only hope for survival. If the humans were as dangerous as they seemed, then they needed to know exactly who they were dealing with, not just guess from the shadows. The debate was cut short when a new message came through from the Valiant. The warship had stopped, just on the edge of the colony's system. It lingered, hanging there in space like a dark specter. But there was something more. The ship had activated a signal beacon, one that had not been detected before. The beacon's signal was sharp, clear, and focused on the Zalvari colony, pulsing in the deep void like a heartbeat. The message was simple, but it carried an unbearable weight. Remember. The word repeated in the transmission, echoing through the command room like a phantom. Remember? The room fell silent again. What did it mean? Was this a warning? A threat? Or something more? The tone was cold, almost as if the humans were reminding them of something long forgotten, something the Zalvari didn't understand. The tension in the room was unbearable. The Valiant hadn't launched an attack. It hadn't even moved toward the colony. But the signal was clear. The humans were watching, and the Zalvari had no idea why. The unknown stretched out before them like a vast, dark ocean, and they were now caught in its currents, unable to escape. The Valiant lingered just outside the Zalvari colony system, its massive form suspended in the cold vacuum of space like a shadow. The tense anticipation from the Zalvari command was almost unbearable, the silence between them and the human ship stretching long and oppressive. The warship hadn't moved. No weapons were primed. No further messages had come. It was as if the ship was simply waiting for something. And then, with a soft hum that vibrated through the void, the Valiant released a transmission. Not a threat, but a message. At first, the Zalvari didn't know what to make of it. The message wasn't a call to arms, nor a declaration of war. Instead, it was an invitation. It was a warning, a blunt, simple statement. We don't seek conquest. We prepare for it, because others do. The words were direct, stark in their honesty. There was no malice, no grand threat of destruction, just a calm explanation. The humans weren't here to expand or dominate. They weren't the aggressive force the Zalvari had feared. They had built the Valiant, and ships like it, not to conquer, but to survive. Humanity's strength, it seemed, was not born from a desire for power. It was forged from the need to protect. Protect themselves and the fragile peace they had carved out in the galaxy. Then came the most shocking part of the transmission. The Valiant began to release data, a staggering amount of information covering centuries of history that the Zalvari had never encountered. It spoke of a time long before the present, a galactic incident that no other species seemed to remember, a dark and terrible threat, something so vicious that humanity had fought it alone. Their civilization standing on the brink of annihilation. It was a time of desperation, of sheer will, when Earth had been forced to take up arms not only against invaders, but against an enemy no one else dared face. The Valiant had been built in the aftermath of that long-forgotten war, a reminder, not of victory, but of the cost of survival. The galaxy had forgotten, or perhaps never known, how close humanity had come to being wiped out. And so, the humans had retreated, fading into the shadows of the galaxy, not because they were weak, but because they had remembered what they had once had to become. The message ended with one final statement, almost haunting in its simplicity. We stayed hidden, not because we are weak, but because we remember how strong we had to become. The words lingered in the Zalvari minds, echoing through the silence of their command center. The humans had not sought to dominate the stars. They had not wanted to conquer. But they had prepared for war, because they had survived a war that had nearly destroyed them. The Valiant was not just a warship. It was a shield, a reminder that humanity had faced the darkest possible future and emerged stronger for it. For the first time, the Zalvari began to understand. They had feared humanity, feared what they could become, but they had never taken the time to understand what humanity already was. The Zalvari had built their empire on cooperation, on unity, on peace. But the humans had built their strength through survival, through an unyielding will to endure, even in the face of certain extinction. The two species were fundamentally different, and that difference had made the Zalvari tremble. As the final echoes of the message faded, the Valiant did something that no one had expected. It silently warped away, vanishing into the depths of space with the same quiet grace with which it had arrived. There was no fanfare, no declaration of victory. The humans were gone. The Valiant was gone. The Zalvari were left alone in the void, their minds buzzing with questions and realizations. The transmission had not been a threat. It had been a warning, a reminder of something they had forgotten. In the days that followed, the Zalvari made a decision. They renamed the system where the Valiant had stopped. Human border. Do not engage. It was a quiet acknowledgement that the humans, for all their hidden strength, were not a species to be underestimated. The Zalvari may have been the dominant force in the galaxy, but they now knew that humanity was a force in its own right, and the galaxy, in its quiet corners, would never forget the humans again. The final thought lingered like a shadow. The galaxy feared what humans might become. What they forgot was what humans already were.